question. I have a preface to the question.
Right.
I have noticed that recently the number of people who are dissatisfied with both political parties is growing. Does that trend continue? And is that trend needed to essentially get rid of the two-party system?
So let me make a quick comment here. So there is I'm trying to remember where I read this analogy, but like if you go and collect 100 black African ants and put them in a jar, and you go collect 100 red ants and put them in a jar, they'll be fine. Like they're totally fine just being together. But if you pick up the jar and you shake it and then dump it out on the ground, they'll basically fight to the death. Like the black ants will pit against the red ants and just fight to the death. Now, I don't know if this pertains directly to your question, but I feel like the party system is the hand shaking the jar.
She had not been 2 weeks from shore when down on her a right whale bore. The captain called all hands and swore he'd take that whale in tow.
Ha!
Soon may the wellerman come to bring us sugar and tea and rum. One day when the tonguing is done, we'll take our leave and go.
So let's lay the groundwork for our conversation today for a minute. So right now it feels as if the political landscape is very, very polarized. It doesn't only feel that way.
It is that way.
And so,
would you say worse than ever in your
Yes.
200-year lifespan?
yeah,
Yes.
in my 31
Your
years,
experience?
definitely.
I would say so.
I would say it is worse than ever. You have people on one side saying, basically Trump is the epitome of evil. Look at all the terrible things he's done in his past. You have Biden, the people who are against Biden saying, well, he can't even keep a thought straight, and he's losing his. And then you've got the extremes of outside of politics with wear a mask, don't wear a mask. Everything is politicized, down to the mask you wear. That is a political statement you are making. Just the things that seem like they should be separated or not correlated to politics are completely correlated to politics.
Say what your post was.
So my post was, I'm conducting a survey, and what would you say are the characteristics of Trump supporters? And obviously,
It's funny.
everybody responded in different ways. Some of them very extreme and uninformed.
Yeah,
a lot of them were.
Some people were like, a Trump
never.
supporter is definitely someone who is completely uninformed and has been conned by wonderful propaganda and is just kind of a moron, but thinks that they're doing what's good for the world, but really they're Satan. It's like it falls straight into what we're seeing now, which is. And my dad said it this weekend, right? I can't tell you how many times, and this phrase never existed until the last couple of years. It's been a brilliant piece of right-wing propaganda that liberals are destroying or trying to destroy the country, right? Take that take a step back. It's wait a second. Liberals live here too. You think they want to destroy and light on fire all the buildings that they live in and society in the community. You think they want to destroy their own community? But yet, that is everywhere now.
I feel like it's more to do with destroying what has been a long-held belief about the country. So destroying the country as some people know it and want it to remain.
Right,
I think would be more.
Yeah.
I think it's less about physically destroying the country.
I agree. I think that every single person has moved to Elk Ridge in the last 5 years. Essentially a week after I moved in. I think anybody else new to Elk Ridge is destroying the city, because I used to be able to look down and see a whole bunch of deer and elk roaming on the mountain, and now all these people are destroying it, right? That's the natural progression is that if people have on average more than 2 children and the population grows, life has to change. And there's some people who are not okay with that. But that's just kind of a reality of the world that we live in. Like it just can't stay the same.
So let me give a contrarian perspective here, because we just asked, is it worse than it's ever been? That was like one of our first questions.
In regards to political polarization.
In regards to political polarization, I would say yes, in our lifetime, for sure. However, if we were like back in the times of like civil rights movement, would we say the same thing? Or if we even push back further and like you've got Hamilton getting shot by the vice president. You know what I mean? Like there was literally one member of a political party murdering another member of a political party. That's pretty intense in terms of polarization. So
yeah. Well,
do you feel like, though, and I'm getting to something here, do you feel like it's because we can communicate so quickly in our time that we can polarize very, very fast? So, like, the movement of information, someone can write a really left-wing article, and it can go viral, and everyone's going to see it that really supports the left. And then a person on the right can also write a very viral and vicious, compelling argument for the right, and that can go viral. And so both sides are seeing an extreme viewpoint that has very sound logic written into it. You know what I'm saying? Like, I can read an article from someone on the left and be like, that is sound logic. I can understand that. I can also read someone on the right and be like, that has some sound logic. I like that. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I feel like the movement of information so quick that it just absolutely sets us on one side or the other so much quicker than it has in the past.
I know the answer. Do you want me to? Yeah. So
let's
the
start
question
down that road.
again is,
How did
we become so polarized? Are we more polarized now than we've ever been in the past? And there's some good data on this, right? And exactly why it happened. I think this data has been collected since like the 60s or 70s. There's a study actually that just came out of Northwestern within the last couple months that tracked political polarization. And essentially, you look at the polarization, the two political parties were pretty close, had some kind of ebbs and flows. Little side note, you remember when we were in the political situation where all of our parents were like, well, man, Clinton's a great president, great statesman, but man, he cheated on his wife. You remember when that was like the worst political situation we could be in? Anyways, so essentially, around year 2000 or the early 2000s, essentially right at the beginning of the data science era, the political parties with hundreds of billions of data points started to crunch the data, and they started to find out outrage of the other guys actually triggers the right behavior to get voters on our side, right? We don't want to talk about the good things that we want to do. We want to talk about the bad things that they are trying to do, and that actually generates more action. That generates more action, right? So you see, starting in the 2000s, the gap just starts to open and open and open, and then we get to Trump, who even most people that vote for him just hate his guts, right? He's not a good person. I don't think anybody could make the argument that he's a good person, right? And of course, what makes it even worse is that all of the political leadership on the left, like, they're not even doing their jobs. They're just 100% focused on trying to get Trump out of office, right? But essentially, the whole political polarization started with data science and started with, people being able to find out that, and it's the same thing with social media, right? You generate more engagement in kind of anger or disgust of someone else's idea that you think is a bad idea. And kind of going back to that idea that, like, liberals are trying to destroy America. Like, if there's millions of articles titled with that very same thing. and it's just this. It's a piece of right-wing propaganda that is very useful at manipulating people who are not intelligent or not informed enough to know that they're being manipulated to get on their side. So that's exactly what it is. And I'm sorry to tell you, but you're all just misinformed and you're morons, and I'm smarter than you. So sit down and listen.
A little piece of history to substantiate the first part of that statement. I think you guys all remember this probably from watching maybe Jordan Peterson videos, but George Orwell observed back in his kind of tour through Europe during World War I, I believe, or World War II, just observing the reasons why people were going a little bit more, say, Marxist or a little bit more the other way, fascist. Either way, he observed that people weren't so concerned necessarily about the poor, like in the Soviet Union, and like making everything equal. They were more concerned about bringing down the rich, and in the SARS case, that probably was the right thing to do because they had like 99% of the wealth. But
that makes sense.
So that's
in like
essentially
Russia.
what you're saying, though, is that like people are more likely to act in either a revolutionary way or a little bit less, in our case, against another group.
You're either
more
voting
than
against
for
Trump.
you actually believe in.
Most people are voting against Trump or voting against Biden, right? They're not voting for Biden or for Trump, right?
And I think that's an unfortunate consequence of the fact that the past two election cycles have been mostly disappointing candidates on both sides. So it immediately becomes a party lines thing. Like where your only justification is, well, I just can't let the other guy or the other group have
the Umbridge and Lockhart scenario.
Is the party system broken?
Hell yes, Spencer.
Okay, so
Don't they call you the Iron
Sure.
of Cedar Hills?
absolutely.
Are you gonna live up to that title, Mr. Iron of Cedar Hills?
All right, Brian. Let's
man.
calm down.
Easy.
I'm excited for those.
Jeez. No, so it's so at this point, what do you do with that, with the party system? What's a better solution?
Well, so I think
And
the biggest.
maybe I'm jumping the gun and getting to solutions too early, but I'm
Yeah.
just thinking about the party system itself. Like,
Well, I don't think
I
it's
hate it.
I don't think it's necessarily the party system itself that is the problem. I think that the party system could work. I think the biggest problem, and it's funny too, because essentially people are voting for the right or for the left based on what they say they're going to do, right? But did the camera just turn off? But political candidates, it's almost impossible to be voted into a national office as a member of the House or Senate or president or cabinet without pretty much becoming a slave to the largest corporations who get you in office through their political backing, right? So the campaign finance laws have created this system in which even the left, who is supposed to be the party of the little guy, right? They're never going to do what's in, they're never going to create policy that's not in the best interests of Chase and Chase Bank and Bank of America and JP Morgan and all these companies. It's just not going to happen anymore because everyone's bought off and they can't even get to political office unless they're willing to be bought off. So, I think I think we could see that in the last, the primaries for the Democratic Party. Like, who actually thought Biden was the best candidate? Like, I thought Buttigieg and Tulsi Gabbard and Andrew Yang. There were so many better candidates, but Tulsi and Andrew and these candidates were not willing. I mean, they weren't willing to get bought off. Essentially. Yeah. So I don't know. I think that's the biggest problem. One of the biggest problems is that there's this financial stranglehold where essentially our elected officials are doing what the biggest companies want them to do. They're not doing what's in the best interest of the people.
Yankers.
So Thomas Sowell's theory of constrained and unconstrained theories of economics, right? Can you describe what that is so that we can?
Yeah, so and it's actually it can be applied to things like economics. Thomas Sowell is an economist, but this actually comes from a book about that he titled "A Conflict of Visions," and kind of broke down why certain political beliefs are found with each other, and he kind of explains it with a constrained vision and an unconstrained vision, and the constrained vision is more of the man is flawed, and what you hope to do with government or with any systems that you want to implement in society, you are hoping to create systems that can't be abused. So man is essentially flawed. The description that he used was that, or the one that he agreed to, was that mankind's nature is flawed and fixed. I would say mostly fixed. So you want to set up systems around mankind that will limit their ability to abuse power, so that the human errors are not catastrophic because they've wielded massive power.
Right.
So it's about creating systems that balance that out. And then the unconstrained view is more or less that people are kind of more blank slates, and that it's systems and leaders that directly impact the progression of people in any case. So he used there's a French philosopher, maybe Rousseau, who said man is free but everywhere in chains, which he took to mean that, like what I already said, just that like that it's the institutions, it's the systems that are created that are wrong, and that there has to be a perfect system that will make people have the more ideal state of life.
So before we move on and talk about those two options, do you think that there's a third or any sort of kind of obviously there's an in-between?
One of the biggest issues that I have with almost the format of our own discussion, which is commonplace, is that we love to label things. And I think we are naturally triggered by somebody who claims a certain philosophy, and we think that if you are Republican, then you have to agree with the full party. If you subscribe to the constrained vision,
We don't like labels.
It's all
well,
or
no,
nothing.
well,
We shouldn't have labels.
we shouldn't. Yeah, that's what it is. Exactly. So we shouldn't have labels, because even today we should have Republican and Democratic candidates that have maybe policies that are outside of what Republicans or Democrats would typically do.
Sure.
But they can't do that, as you explained earlier, that you kind of have to get in, align with
Have
the
to play
platform.
the party's game.
Exactly. So the partisanship is awful, because we can't have a Democratic candidate who happens to have some Republican values, because he'd be rejected by the party. He couldn't even get to the stage. And I mean, we kind of have to take some of that credit, or some of the blame there, is just because we've enabled that behavior, because we have allowed ourselves to be manipulated. And I'm sad. I feel like in a lot of ways, the way that votes are currently acquired for both parties is an insult to our humanity and our intelligence.
Can I make a quick comment about the way that the theories, and I could be way off, but the way that the unconstrained and the constrained theories read to me is that typically conservatives more align with the unconstrained, which is kind of taking out our knowledge of human behavior. What is kind of the ideal world that we would like to see? For example, right, the idea of I want this country to be a place where someone who is, born the poorest of the poor can become, can create his own company and become a billionaire, right? Which there's it's called, economic mobility or social mobility, right? So the idea on the conservative side is we want to be in a country where that is possible, right? Whereas I see more of the liberal side saying we agree with that too, but we're actually lower in economic mobility than every other major developed country in the developed world. So it's a beautiful idea, but we know what human behavior looks like based in the society that we're in. So we actually think that, we should keep that idea, but actually we need to tweak and make changes based on the human behavior that actually is happening. It's kind of the ought versus the is. I know that, that I'm sure it's got flaws here and there, and I'm just going to keep talking a little bit longer because I can see how cringy Zach is getting. But that's my read between a lot of kind of the conservative side versus the liberal side, in conversations with people I'm close to, this is the way it ought to be versus, but all these things are actually happening. We know the results of what you think ought to be, and it's not a good result. Should we try and change the result of what is happening? So, all right, do whatever you do, Zach.
So it's actually the exact opposite. The exact opposite. You just made an excellent description of more or less the constrained view, particularly as it applies to law, and hopefully this helps illustrate it. So there's also a video that I'm drawing on when I'm trying to share these ideas. You can look it up. It's an interview that was done with Thomas Sowell in the Hoover Institute at Stanford. It's like a 37-minute video where he actually applies the unconstrained and constrained visions to economics, to military, to law, and societal issues. So so what you were saying specifically about what we know historically has happened, the constrained view of law is not based on logic, but on experience. Everything that has been, it's interesting because I was thinking of like Jedi and Sith.
That's the constrained view?
That's the constrained view.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's like the Jedi and the Sith, like all of the Jedi live in you. Our present day law is, a descendant from English law, and the Constitution itself is a document that is kind of corresponds with the Declaration of Independence, which was based off of all the offenses that the king had put on the Americans. So we wrote up a constitution that was going to protect people from government that would abuse its power the way the king had done. So law is based on precedent. So we find out that certain things happen, and because of that experience, we start to make laws to counteract that, to understand that man is fundamentally flawed and that we make mistakes. So how can we limit that on a public and social scale insofar as it doesn't interfere with individualism? So that's a whole nother, topic. And one thing that I think is interesting as a little sidebar, the term liberal is mostly misapplied to the left. Any country outside of the United States interprets the word liberal, again, ironically opposite.
Yeah, we know. We're morons.
No,
We're not using the right labels, Zach.
No, but I mean, I think it is something that in some ways does hamper communication in the way that we understand politics, both domestic and international. And again, side note, not really important.
All right, so don't use liberal or conservative. Use Republican and Democrat.
So
everything we're talking about though, is an international. It's a universal. What we're talking about is universal thought. It's not. It doesn't have to do with America and how polarized we are. It has to do with the philosophies of each individual on what will help society move to a more perfect union.
Also, there's an intellectual corridor that we could go down that I thought was really interesting in that same discussion that I've been talking about. This book, The Conflict of Visions, he talks about how you could compare the American Revolution with the French Revolution, and that the American Revolution mostly represents the constrained vision, and kind of what explains the formation of the Constitution and why it's built the way it is. And then the French Revolution was the unconstrained vision, which, frankly, I don't have a lot of familiarity with the French Revolution. Do you happen, or anybody here?
No,
I would encourage you to look at that.
I hear they have great wine.
So he
had
a
bike race.
He had a couple of funny stories where he noticed that in the French Revolution, they were pursuing a replacement of their aristocracy with a different aristocracy, which was the unconstrained view, saying if we had the right leaders, then everything would be better. So
utopia.
They're
making decisions based on the utopia that they could see themselves.
Yes, the potential, instead of historical what's happened, what's worked. And I think that also kind of plays into the term conservative, meaning like you're sticking to what is known, you're sticking to what has worked. And then, the more progressive side is maybe playing with ideas and trying to apply them, maybe without, historical backing. It's a theoretical thing, that kind of stuff. So a couple of things that I thought were interesting. One kind of joke that he said dealing with the system of checks and balances was that apparently there was some famous French guy who was in support of the French Revolution and was confused by the Americans' concept of the system of checks and balances and was in jail arbitrarily because there was no systems of checks and balances. So there's like an irony with that. Again, I don't have the details, but it's just interesting to see people explaining it in the context of these concepts. But more specifically, in the Supreme Court, he used this example that I think also helps illustrate it, in that we have, is it constitutionalists? Actually, that's not the right term. Regardless, he talked about how at the time of this video, it was John McCain v. Obama in their presidential races. So he was using what either one of them were saying in terms of these topics to kind of say, is this unconstrained? Is this constrained? So the constrained version of selecting a Supreme Court justice would be somebody who will sustain the law as is, who will interpret the law as is. And at the time, Obama had made the remark that he's like, hey, if there's a single mother who, gets under legal fire for whatever reason, and it's not like fair, that he would support a judge who would make it fair. So I think they call it like legislating from the judgment seat or something, where you're not interpreting. And he gave examples of times when judges were critical of a certain litigant, and in the end, they ruled in favor of that litigant, even though they had personal issues with that person. Meaning that their job was to be a referee or an umpire. It wasn't about what was right. It was about what is the law saying and how can we enforce the rule of law. So it's not about what's fair, which I think has some contemporary application for what we've experienced to a degree of, a Supreme Court ruling in favor of something that may not seem morally fair or just, but it is legally just. And Sowell actually has an entire other book that talks about the pursuit of cosmic justice and that comparison between cosmic and traditional justice. But sorry, that's another sidebar.
So quick question. You agree, just a one-word answer. You agree with Thomas Sowell on the unconstrained.
And that's what I dislike about these conversations to a degree is
right.
I lean towards the constrained vision.
Okay, yeah, because the reason I ask is because I was talking to somebody earlier this week that disagrees with that premise of that there's unconstrained and constrained and so I believe there is an actual truth as to why a lot of people might be on that constrained side and a lot of people might be on the unconstrained, whatever you want to call them. That's semantics, but you know what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. A lot of people would disagree with that whole premise that it's not accurate that there's only those two camps. But if we're using it as kind of a stepping stone or maybe a foundation to build upon how we got to such a polarized place, then can we all agree on the constrained or unconstrained, or is there a different way that we can say that?
I think whatever exercise we would perform for trying to determine the efficacy of constrained and unconstrained visions, we could do the same thing with political parties, with the different sides of every argument, where there are, as Spencer said earlier in the discussion, there are reasonable and rational arguments for both sides.
Yeah, and coming back to, I think what Brian started us out with was with the religious side of, because I see everything that we're talking about in politics today as a theological problem, really, or not problem, where people are seeing this is mankind imperfect. We need to set up a system that addresses the imperfection that will never change. And then another theological debate or another theological perspective would be mankind is evolving and becoming better or worse or whatever it might be. We are changing, and hopefully we can adjust the system so that it evolves toward a utopia, or you don't have to call it utopia, but something better and better. So it does seem like a and the more we drop religion, the more I can see that people would say, well, it's the government's responsibility to make these things happen. But then, and we'll probably go into this, there are some kind of more libertarian-leaning folk that would suggest we can evolve and we can become better without government, and it doesn't matter your theological leanings. So
I don't think you can do that completely. I think you can do that more than we are right now, right? but there's a purpose for government, and it is to do the things that need to be done that do not make economic sense for a company to do it for a profit-seeking motive, right? Because that's the libertarian view, right?
It's not just me, man.
All right, let me finish my damn comment, Zach. Okay. Okay. Remove any comment about the libertarian view.
I'll bleep it.
Libertarians.
No, I like.
What was
the L word.
What was
I
I
like where you
saying
were
before I
headed.
got derailed? What was I
So
saying?
you were talking about how the purpose of government is to
Oh,
perform.
okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So here's an
have different
example,
solutions.
right? One of the recent examples of how conservatives think that liberals are trying to destroy the country is that conservatives say, oh, liberals want to privatize all vaccine production and ventilator production for COVID-19. So that's kind of the argument, right? They're trying to privatize a lot of the healthcare production, right? And socialism means like the, privatization of the means of production of whether it's, automotive or, pick your industry. There is no incentive for a hospital network to prepare for a COVID-19 type scenario that has never happened before, because it is seen as a cost in the private market that will likely never recuperate that cost, right? So there are always going to be things that do not make sense to do in the private market for a for-profit company to do. Regardless of whether it is the libertarian view or not, I don't give a damn.
Right. No, what we're addressing here is people differ on what they think the solution to problems are. I think for the most part, people agree on what the issues are and that we need to improve in a certain fashion. And that might be like a 70% margin. Most people agree on that. But when it comes to the solution, that's where we start splitting.
Yeah.
And that's what you're essentially saying. You had a thought, though, because you
No. Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry.
I don't know
Yeah.
solution. Beyond
That-
beyond basically saying like.
Now,
sorry.
I now have a thought.
Yeah, hit it.
Sorry. One other element, and I don't know if this is necessarily a constrained or unconstrained comparison, but, and again, I think I've become somewhat of a disciple of Sol, but I mean, if this is nothing more than an example of somebody's political ideologies in flight that are subject to change in a short amount of time, let it be so. One thing that he said was interesting was the constrained view is not to necessarily reach panacea or utopia, because mankind is flawed and we can't elevate every single soul, like, because we are also flawed by nature. So anything that we produce is going to be flawed. Therefore, it is in our best interest to create systems that are harder to abuse, because we can't do it all perfectly for everybody. To try to execute cosmic justice to level everything out perfectly and make restitution for any and every malady or social injustice towards anybody, it's astronomical to try to factor in the fact that it's not just people within a single group who have one need of being restituted for one thing, because each of them is made up of strengths and weaknesses, and there is a balance of like what would balance the scales for each person individually. It's impossible to be managed and administered by a team of humans, maybe even by a supercomputer, to try to create some sort of arithmetic or algorithm to specifically outline like what would be the most appropriate justice for everybody who's ever experienced anything. Right. So he more or less talks about just a simple concept of trade-offs. Like, you accept that anytime you do anything to address social needs of any one group, large or small, it will have repercussions that will adversely affect some of the group. Most of the time. I don't think it's every time with every policy. But there's always a trade-off. So the three most important questions for him was, when considering a change or when considering any sort of a political policy, what cost does it come with? Where is the evidence to suggest that it's going to work? And how does it compare to what we have now? So a more pragmatic
good
approach
three
that is accepting of our imperfection and the resulting imperfect systems that can only be built imperfectly is something that he kind of talks about.
And there's danger in jumping the gun to just experimenting with certain policies. In maybe both of our opinions, because you put a policy or a law into place, it's a little bit harder to retract that, when you could just consider all the details in those three questions really deeply and hopefully not demonize the other party so you can actually get it done.
Also, the way our political system is built as it pertains to the Constitution is you have senators House of Representatives, people who can serve for 2 years, right? President for 4 years, senators for 6 years. So some interpretations of the design of that Constitution is that it favors firm and long-term political ideas. So not spur-of-the-moment stuff. The executive branch is probably the most fast-moving, capable branch of government, but even then they can't sustain their own interests without support from the legislative branch, like going to war. Like a president can send troops to places, but if he doesn't get like the backing of Congress, like that won't happen.
Which is why I've always said, like, no matter who gets elected, it feels like the net impact on my life is like there's no
none.
Which is by design.
I think
which
that
I'm
is.
grateful for.
I think, and I got, I mentioned that on a social media post, and someone kind of responded back and essentially said, "That's because you're wealthy, right? Or you have money." And it's, I mean, to some extent, it's true. Like if my tax burden doubled, my life wouldn't change at all, But little changes for, single moms without, a college degree who are making $20,000 a year trying to, support 3 kids. Like, small legislation means a lot to those people. And when I was thinking about this discussion earlier today, in the state of Utah, there was a tax addendum that the state government was trying to enact, which would increase the tax by 2% or something like that on groceries, things purchased at grocery stores. And Governor Herbert's response to that, because it came out, hey, poor people already have an incentive to eat fast food, right? It's cheap, it's there, right? It's super easy to get. It doesn't require cooking. This is even worse, right? This is encouraging them even more to eat fast food, right? And the governor's response to that was, but we're going to have this tax break, so that when they file their taxes, then they're going to get, their tax bill is actually going to go down. I see that as kind of the unconstrained view, like in the ideal world, right, they are going to actually decrease because we're going to give their money back in tax breaks. But President Herbert, or Governor Herbert, knows that people who are beneath the poverty line don't file taxes, right? So he's trying to, he was trying to pass this as like, look, it's not going to raise their taxes. It's going to raise everybody else's taxes, without actually knowing, like, what do they actually file their taxes? And the answer is no. So it's actually going to increase their tax burden. So I thought that was a local example of kind of the discussion that we're having.
It was really interesting. This is on CNN. Wolf Blitzer interviewing Nancy Pelosi. This might end up becoming a big deal. My brother-in-law sent this to me. I genuinely don't watch CNN or Fox, or I don't watch a lot of news. So it's kind of interesting because, like, as soon as the interview starts, he just grills her because apparently the $1.8 trillion stimulus bill is on the table, and she's not moving it forward.
More money, guys.
And President Trump is saying, like, go big, or go home, like, all in on the stimulus bill. Like, he's wanting to push it. It's money that Wolf Blitzer argued was something that families needed. We need it now. And she was giving her responses, basically trying to justify talking more, and people interpreted it as her being more interested in defying Trump than getting these funds to the American people. And so Wolf Blitzer was basically saying, like, these people need it. Like, why are you doing this? Like, can't you just move it forward? And she says, you don't know the difference between the bill that we proposed is to this one, which is, I don't know what the difference is between the two. And there could be all those sneaky things where, like, money is getting put into random places where it really has nothing to do with us, which I think happened in the first stimulus bill.
On a toilet seat.
Yeah.
Anyways,
Yeah.
so
$30,000
but
on
she
a hammer.
continued to push back, and then as the interview kind of devolved into a lot of like Trump Biden debate-esque type of an exchange, it got weird in the sense that she just repeated over and over again, like, we represent them, we represent them, we are feeding them, we are feeding them. And she's like, you don't care about the people, like, you're not supporting our cause or whatever. And he's like, I do care, like, I'm seeing these people, like, blah, blah, blah. I don't know who's right or wrong, but it is interesting that, you know, she explained her point that way, but then also said, like, we represent them, we are feeding them, which I don't know. That kind of rubbed me the wrong way. I already am not much of a statist, you know, type of a person, and I'm already made that kind of more clear that I just feel like I don't feel like these federal people really know us.
And what they say, that right there, we represent them, we represent them, we feed them, we feed them. I give it like a 95% probability that came from a focus group of someone in Pelosi's. So, and what I find on both sides of the political party, you know, we had, when I worked at Qualtrics, we had Orrin Hatch, old man Hatch come and you could, you know, the Qualtrics employee base is super intelligent, right? And there were a couple times he was kind of bantering with one of the Qualtrics co-founders who's liberal, and Orrin Hatch, he said, you know, I'm more conservative because I think that's more the, you know, the honest way. And he said conservative and honest 3 times within a couple words of each other, and you could just see, and everybody was kind of looking at each other. We're like, is everybody else feeling a little weird right now? And you could just see, you know, someone in Orrin Hatch's office just say, okay, we did a focus group. People like honesty. Say conservative and honesty really close together a bunch of times, and you're likely to get X number of voters.
Yeah.
So stuff like that, you know,
family
Pelosi
values.
just saying, we represent them, we feed them, we feed them. I mean, it's I feel like the political debate and those little lines by the political candidates are designed to manipulate and direct kind of the most, you know, those that are easiest to be manipulated, if that makes sense. But, you know, I do think it's interesting. Sorry, and I don't know if I'm derailing the conversation, but question. I have a preface to the question.
Right.
I have noticed that recently the number of people who are dissatisfied with both political parties is growing. Does that trend continue? And is that trend needed to essentially get rid of the two-party system?
So let me make a quick comment here. So there is I'm trying to remember where I read this analogy, but like if you go and collect 100 black African ants and put them in a jar, and you go collect 100 red ants and put them in a jar, they'll be fine. Like they're totally fine just being together. But if you pick up the jar and you shake it and then dump it out on the ground, they'll basically fight to the death. Like the black ants will pit against the red ants and just fight to the death. Now, I don't know if this pertains like directly to your question, but I feel like the party system is the hand shaking the jar. Because oftentimes when it starts with me, I'm fine having a conversation with a person whom I don't agree with, and come to find out there are things about me that are totally, you know, Democratic. There are things about me that are Republican. there's things about me that are libertarian based on my stuff that I've read and watched from, that you've shared. There are I'm like equal parts of a lot of things, and I'm fine to have that conversation. But occasionally, I just feel like the party system is picking up the jar of America, shaking it, and then dumping us out and watching us just eat each other alive. It's like, It feels that way to me. So, I don't know.
Do you guys remember the show Divergent?
Yes.
Man, I hated that show. The main reason why is because I felt that it was like just an oversimplification of human nature. Right? I mean, okay, sorry. I don't want to act like I'm some kind of purist, right? I watched all the movies and it was entertaining. So there's that. But it was like considered so revolutionary. There was like a line in the movie where people are divided into factions like Dauntless, Erudite, can't remember the other ones, but they all basically embodied like a very specific trait. Like Dauntless was like bravery, courage, and like Erudite was studied and intellectual, and then there was I can't remember the other ones.
Calm and
there was like charity was this essence of one, and then there was like the judging one, whatever. So and then there was like a line where the guy's like, I want to be brave, I want to be smart, and like all those things. And you're like, yeah, like that's really how it is. Like we all are, an amalgamation of all these different ideals, and these are also subject to change. Like that is human nature. And we get so torqued off at like these politicians that change their mind on some topics. And like the greatest sin, the greatest political sin is to be a flip-flopper. Yeah. Which, I mean, flip-flopper might be, if you go leave it and come back or whatever. It's all debatable, but we act so surprised that like somebody is not principled if they don't just like hold fast with white knuckles around whatever principle they came in with. Like we don't see that transition of people like going to different places, and also maybe that holding a position during a certain time period is more important. Like I don't think I'm a hardcore anarcho-capitalist libertarian, but the concept of reducing government significantly to me right now is a big deal, and I see it as a legitimate third party. Again, now I'm starting to get like all pitchy, but like really, it's on the ballot in all 50 states, including DC. Like potentially, is there a way that somehow in some crazy universe that like the American people could speak and it could mean something because we're putting other ideologies in play? Would it take some time? Yeah. And as long as our votes still count for something, then great. If they don't, we're like,
more bleeps.
Like,
hey, did you guys
at that point the only option would be revolution, right?
Have you guys heard about the Weinstein's Unity 2020 idea?
No,
I can explain
that's as much
it
as I've heard about it.
So the Eric and Brett Weinstein, some of the smartest guys in the world, right? PhDs in biology and mathematics, and I don't know exactly which one of them came up with Unity 2020, but essentially their idea is to take a center right and center left candidate, have them run together on the same ticket, essentially flip a coin for who gets to be the president, who gets to be the vice president, but they make decisions together, and then every 4 years they switch, right? So the president becomes a vice president until one of them doesn't want to do it anymore, or until they've both done 2 terms as president. Yeah. So I like the idea. It's very unconstrained in that it's like this utopian idea high in the sky, because we're still very much locked into the two-party system. But if this dissatisfaction with both political parties continues to grow, it's only a matter of time before a Mark Cuban type or an Oprah type or Dwayne the effing Rock Johnson type says, you know what, I'm going to run for president, and I don't have a political party. I'm going to vote for that person 100% of the time.
Yeah.
But especially for Oprah.
Oh, definitely.
Because she's a woman and she's black.
Or Kevin Hart. I guess.
Not a woman.
One of the vice.
Not a woman.
Yeah.
I think there's also, and what Brett Weinstein said most recently was that it's interesting how we kind of have this two-dimensional view of the political spectrum. It's like left or right. But you don't realize that there's the other axis of political ideologies. You can look up like the Political Compass. That's a website to do a test. Debatable, but again, it's just a way to explore your political leanings, because it isn't just left or right. Because you can be more government left or right, or less government left or right. And there was a video recently by Brett Weinstein specifically where he talked about like, hey, like the left and right libertarian-sided people should consider themselves allies in the sense that they don't want like a super heavy-handed government or a super entrenched government. They don't have the same values because there are differences in like the right and left direction, but they are still essentially agreed on a great many subjects. And again, we just don't see it. Like when you only see two options, when the Commission for the Presidential Debates is a bipartisan group, like they have no interest in other people being able to talk about it. Right. And there's nobody to hold what both parties might both do wrong. I mean, if we were polarized, I'd feel better about a tertiary polarization instead of a binary polarization.
That's an additional third party for those who don't know the word tertiary. You're so
big words.
Gosh,
So
you're so. What's the right word I'm looking for?
Verbose.
You're so elitist.
Verbose.
Using large words, Zach.
Well, so are there other solutions that you guys have discussed? One that I discussed with my roommates was, shoot, now I'm forgetting ranked choice voting. So that's another one.
Yep.
That I would see, all these solutions would really, if it involves more than two people, would really calm down the discussion and the polarization, because it's like, well, I like this person a little bit more than this person, but I really don't like this person.
You know why that's never going to happen though?
Civil discourse. Yeah, I'm curious as to,
because it is human nature, right? And there's been so many experiments of this, right? It is human nature to act more on the potential of loss than on the potential of gain. Does that make sense?
So, yeah, use that in a scenario.
So you're on a game show. You win $10,000. You have the opportunity to go double or nothing. Because you've already earned the first $10,000, most people choose not to double or nothing because the potential of losing that $10,000 is much better than the gain of potentially getting $20,000.
Or what you said earlier, like where it's like the Republicans saying that the Democrats are ruining the country. Like instead of focusing on what great virtues a certain political leader has, like what you could gain by voting for this person, think about what you would lose by other people voting for the opposing candidate.
But yeah, long story short, and you see this in the way President Trump is attacking mail-in ballots. He is scared that if we make voting easier, that he will lose, right? So there is this desire to maintain the status quo because the devil we know is better than the devil we don't. And if we make a change, that could potentially lead to, it's always this thing of protecting what you've got. If I have to make a decision of, keep what I've got, or, potentially get a little bit more, but potentially lose everything I've got, I'm always just going to stay right where I am with everything I've got.
Okay, so you're not saying you're saying to actually put into practice a ranked choice voting.
It's never going to happen because
it won't happen because
parties
both
would
are
need to buy in.
You're right.
And they would be concerned that, I mean, think of it this way, right? Joe Jorgensen, right? Is that the libertarian?
How dare you?
Say her name.
So let's say that.
I feel like that might be a misappropriation of a current issue. And if that is true, I genuinely apologize.
We'll bleep it. We're going to do a lot of bleeping this episode.
Sorry,
Can I continue speaking now?
Sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Sidebar.
Have you seen the SNL skit of the VP debate?
No.
I am speaking, okay? Kamala Harris. I am speaking. And to the people of Arizona and South Texas, estoy hablando. Damn it, Zach. I can't remember
I'm sorry.
what I was
Honestly,
gonna say.
I'm genuinely
Can
sorry.
you keep speaking, Brian?
So
Ranked
Can you
choice
finish your
voting.
thought, Brian?
yeah, it's never going to
voting.
happen
It's never
because
gonna happen.
so here's the scenario, right? We get ranked choice voting. Let's say that makes 2 candidates go into 5 candidates, right? In every single ballot, if I'm conservative, Trump is going to be number 1, Biden's going to be number 5, but Joe Jorgensen is probably going to be number 2 on every single one. Someone who's very non-confrontational, who
Very
looks
accurate.
good to every party. So guess what that
I think
means?
it's true. actually.
The left have more to lose.
up
The
front.
right have more to lose. That middle ground that doesn't have any power today, the Tea Partiers, the independents, the libertarians that have no power, they all gain, right? So it's never going to happen.
But the
because
next
both
election, what would happen? I agree that it would
Well,
be very hard to put it into
Initially,
law
yeah.
initially.
It's
But
but
if it was put into law and that first election cycle, maybe it would do. It
it's
would
gonna
go down
it's
that
gonna
road,
be
but I feel
that
like the next
opens the
election,
door to independence.
It would
You
be
know,
the
an
case.
independent or libertarian or Tea
I'm
Party
down.
or
I'm
you
down.
know
Or
something
Parrot.
like that. But it's never gonna happen because the left and the right have to both vote on it, and they have
I'd
more
vote
to
for
lose
this
than to
parrot
gain.
right now. Just kidding.
You have anything to say?
Did you guys see the political ads, like the little what are they called?
Both of you put your
Like the
mics up.
posters or whatever of there's a frick, like in the Highland Alpine area. I don't know if it's still there, but like going up that road that passes on the east side of Macy's, what used to be Kohler's and Ridley's,
I just saw that
heading
the
north.
first time.
There was a
Macy's.
bunch of what are they called? Just like the
Picket signs?
yeah, the stuff that's on the
signs.
ground, whatever.
Right.
Man, don't know the words. And it was like good boy 2020. It was a golden retriever, and then it was like a cat, and then it interestingly enough, it had a bunch of like actual political stances, and then it said email me at like meow2020@gmail.com. Whoever you are out there, if that ever comes to light, like I'm genuinely curious what that
that's funny.
furry platform is.
Well done.
Yeah.
Well, we've solved the world's problems tonight.
So I
But what's the I'm curious. What's the future? Unless you had a thought to finish up this.
stuff is gonna stay the way it is. All I'm saying is that this conversation has been so boring for me, and I've been a part of it.
So
If you don't listen to the whole thing, I don't blame you. But to summarize, Kamala Harris 2020.
Essentially, that's who you're voting for. But no, I think it's a
Keep people in
legitimate
prison.
question to ask. What's our future look like if things are worse in regard to polarization right now than ever before, and to many people that are it is getting worse. Will we end up in a
Want to know what the future looks
ether
like?
observing Coriantimer and Shiz scenario?
We're gonna live in Ready Player One, where
everybody's in
tries to
a video
avoid
game,
the crappy world that we live in. We're gonna strap on our VR headsets,
except for Thursdays.
and that
was a good
simulated world
conclusion at
is
the end.
so close to reality. But yet it can be anything we want. We can be gods. We can fly. We can be like Dwight Schrute in that video game that
that'd
he
be
played,
so great.
and just fly around. And in the video game, he's still a paper salesman.
Okay, well, I mean,
do systems,
is my legitimate
do systems
question
fix
from
it,
answer?
or do individuals fix it?
well,
And-
I
The
don't
mental
think it's,
question.
it's-
And
I don't
honestly,
think it's a matter of like one or the other in that
it's
regard.
both, right? So like I do feel like that systems have helped us, but we are an evolving and progressing species that does want to like grow. I hope that the future doesn't the future isn't rubble. You know what I'm saying? Like just rubble of the United States, and now we're debased and we're starting fresh again. I hope that individuals are capable of communicating better around politics, one, and two, that the systems themselves can, find solutions in terms of the two-party system, because I think that is broken and needs some work. But I do believe in individuals. That's all I'm saying, is I believe in the capability of the human spirit to conquer the idea that we have to fight about it. Because both sides have rational ideas. They're rational, smart, intelligent humans who believe the way they believe because they have the evidence to believe that way. And it's okay. And I just believe in the individual spirit, our ability to surpass.
What
do
a
you think-
classical liberal perspective. I appreciate that.
To your point about it's not just left and right. There's so many different matrices. Do you think there's a conservative out there who really likes Trump, who does believe in science when it comes to climate science, but doesn't believe in science in the fact that there's no difference between a man and a woman biologically? Does that person exist? Or does a liberal exist that denies climate science but or denies science when it comes to
Gender.
men and women
This is
are
the
the same?
of thought, and this is what Zach was talking about earlier, which is it is the biggest sin in politics to change your mind. When in reality that should be
the biggest virtue.
Biggest
Or to like
Is there a
ideas,
very big virtue?
or to like ideas that come from another party.
Correct.
Like nobody, like it's very rare that you hear like somebody
You're right.
patting the back of something. We're like, oh, that was a great idea. Yeah,
Yeah.
it goes against some of it. Like, and it shouldn't even be like it goes against. It's like I tend to not vote for those types of policies, but in this case, I think it's appropriate.
Yeah.
Like, how refreshing would it be to hear
you
in
don't
a
have to
debate like, no, I totally agree
Choose
with that.
you don't have to
Like,
choose your
come
color.
on. Just one time, I want to hear. No, I agree with that.
But I don't want a horse and pony show. Like, because I think that if there was any traction with people like genuinely being fed up and showing it through the only way that we can, which is voting, that applying that pressure could prompt like, you know, a sense of like remorse maybe or some sort of correction, which honestly is fine if it's legitimate. But like, again, I think the only way that you can affect change as citizens is that we just have to have sound principles about how we get our information, how we come to conclusions, and we should
And how we communicate about those.
and hopefully it matters enough to where we do understand that there are lots of people out there who maybe have opinions and they have their reasons for it. So let's open the dialogue, the civil discourse. Like the irony of it being traditionally, culturally explained that you don't talk, what is it, politics and something else at the dinner table?
Politics and religion.
Politics and religion, right? When in fact, like those are an exchange of ideas that matter the most to humans.
Right.
And
Instead, all we got to talk
so
about
what's
is like,
with this idea of restricting it? I mean, it can end ugly for sure. Like that's the way we are. It tends to get ugly sometimes when we get triggered.
Mm-hmm.
But like, how about we keep flexing that muscle of restraint or constraint?
who's
you know,
read a lot of
Unconstrained.
Jonathan Haidt?
I
It's
like
phenomenal.
Jonathan Haidt a lot. I haven't read a lot.
Yeah,
but I've
so he-
watched
he-
his discourse.
He gives the analogy of there are candles and there are fires, right? And I know that his ideas are more on the left. His ideology is more on the left. However, he does say it's just unfortunate that the idea of the candle, if you blow on the candle, present an opposing view, you blow on the candle goes out. But a fire, you blow on a fire and it gets bigger and it gets stronger. And I think, and his point is, individuals need to be fires, not candles. Our ability to communicate on the issues, we can't let somebody's opposing view blow us out, turn us off. I'm not going to communicate. I'm not going to talk about it anymore. You know, cancel that, the whole like cancel culture type thing. I just feel like people need to be, we need to be presented with differing views because it makes us stronger.
Well,
not because it.
Which takes
there's
us to our
definitely-
discussion on the social dilemma.
Sorry.
Like Facebook's a cesspool, but should we engage? Should we
Right,
jump
right,
in
right.
and do our part?
Yeah.
Like to
I
just
think-
try
I
to
think
create some
there's-
sort of
I think
balanced
there's
approach.
more hope
Yeah.
than
No, that's a good point.
then I've often considered, oh, we're screwed. You know, the future
there's
looks
hope.
bleak. But there is hope based, you know, like even today's responses on my post. Well, like what characterizes a Trump supporter? At least half or more weren't tribal, I'm choosing this side, you're all wrong. A lot of them were very logical, reasonable, and good-spirited, in good faith answers that were like, Trump supporters are good people, and maybe they're confused on this, or this.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that is really cool. But I'm not sure if there's if it's a generational thing either. I
Yeah.
think there might be a little bit of that. I'm a candle, and I don't want to be blown out, so I'm gonna stay away from this, or I'm gonna just like,
Ease my way into the conversation.
ease my way in, or I'm gonna basically join like 600 other candles so that you can't blow us all out. You know, and I wanted to bring up something that my sister said, but it is kind of something on the side as to why people get defensive. Here, I'll just say it is that she I can't remember where she came up with. She had this whole like awesome discourse on it, which is interesting because my sister's She leans a little bit more left, but she's just a brilliant person. I don't know who knows her. You probably know her a little bit more. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. So she essentially argues that when in an argument, be it religious, political, whatever, you tend to believe that the other person is simply ignorant, that they don't know what they're talking about because they don't have all the facts, right? So then you explain the facts, and if they still hold to their position, well, at that point they're stupid. They just don't get it. So you explain it more and more.
That sounds like everybody I've ever had a conversation with.
Right. Yeah. Well, let's get to the last and final. Is that she suggests that, like, yeah, at that point they're stupid, so you need to explain it more, or maybe in a more simple way. And if they still hold to their position after understanding it, then they're evil. You know. But I'm saying all this, that's the kind of the standard progression when we're in a debate, particularly with very
They
hot
want to destroy
topics.
America.
They want to destroy. They're evil. You know, Trump's the savior, and he will crush the serpent.
Trump is the closest thing to a modern day prophet I've ever seen.
Soon may the Wellerman come to bring us sugar and tea and rum. One day when the tonguing is done, we'll take our leave and go. She had not been 2 weeks from shore when down on her right. Oh, wait. Oh, shit.
That's a good rap.
And a cut.